Hello, welcome. I'm Jennifer Fidel, the Director of Public Programming for the Assisi Institute, International Center for the Study of Archetypal Patterns. Today is the first of our complimentary four-part series by Dr. Michael Conforti entitled Ravages of Oppression, Denial, and the Life of the Forgotten, which will continue on the following 3 Saturdays, March the 27th, April 3rd, and the 10th. This program also marks the inaugural launch of the Assisi Foundation, which has made this program possible. My colleague Sylvia Barron will provide more details about the foundation in a moment. I would also like to take time to acknowledge the Washington Young Society for their generous endorsement of this program. The Assisi Institute has enjoyed a long-standing collaborative, professional, and personal relationship with the Washington Group, and we look forward to a long continuation of collaborative study together. The Assisi Institute provides several certificate programs and many public series throughout the year. I would like to mention our next series, Science and Psyche, the Confluence of Matter and Spirit, which will begin on Wednesday, March the 31st. This is also a 4-part series which explores neuroscience, quantum physics, and biology, and the relationship to the psyche and depth psychology. If you have not received the mailer on this series, you can find more information on the Assisi website, where you can also sign up to receive information on all of our certificate and public programs. Before we get started today, there are a few housekeeping notes. For the duration of this program, we will appreciate if you could keep your mic muted. There will not be any questions at the end of the program today, but if you have any comments or reactions you would like to share with Dr. Conforti, he can receive your comments by emailing Annette at the Assisi office. Also, a reminder that we are recording, and each of you will receive a copy of today's presentation around March the 25th. So I would now like to turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, as well as fellow member of the Assisi Institute Board of Directors, Dr. Sylvia Barron, who is also our Director of International Studies. And fittingly so, she is going to welcome our international participation today. Thank you, Sylvia.
Спасибо, Jen. Имен русским коллегам мой сердечный прием. A tutti quanti che parlano l'italiano, che sono nostri colleghi, ti diamo una benvenuta da cuore. Y a todos los colegas que de habla hispano, portugués y otros idiomas alineados al español, les damos una bienvenida de todo corazón. Es un momento para nosotros conmoviente, importante y muy personal. And to all of you English speakers, welcome to the international community of the Assisi Institute. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be able to introduce the work of the Assisi Foundation, which is the foundation that is supporting this program on an international level. I have the honor and the privilege of serving on the board of directors along with my colleagues, Dr. Michael Conforti, Dr. Letizia Amadini-Lane, Dr. Nina Kelly, and Jack Weinrau, who is a retired and still very active lawyer, without whom the foundation would not have been able to build such a strong structure. And it's this strong structure that today brings me from the foundation to introduce the nonprofit that we are, that supports international educational programming. And it's not only international educational programming, but it's programming around universal patterns that aim to help transform not only the personal, but the collective. And today's tremendous kickoff, our fundraising kickoff, is to present the work of Dr. Michael Conforti. I was thinking about how we often say, this work is needed at such a time as this, but we have always been at the precipice of such a time as this. And I think Michael, when he brought up the ravages of oppression, to talk about what is going on and what is possible, that the foundation was thrilled to be able to offer and support financially this great initiative, because it is so important. And thank you to some of the generous donors that I see are on here today. I hope that you're proud of the work that you're about to hear from Dr. Conforti. And you will also be receiving some information from the foundation ongoing to ask you to continue to support programming of this caliber going forward. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Conforti to you. Many of you know Dr. Conforti for many years and in many capacities. And it's not often that I fail for words in introducing Michael. And I just want to tell you, I want to bring you into my world of thinking about what is it important about Dr. Conforti's work now, today. In the past, I've introduced him as a fisherman. In the past, I've introduced him as the father of Christopher, who taught Christopher, where are the flowers before the flowers? But as I was really considering what is the most apt and apropos way of introducing this community, both who know Michael and those who don't. And these images were what came up. And you may be surprised, Michael, and maybe not, that one of the images was of Jules Verne. I recently watched 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and was so impressed because there's a scene in which he takes them down to the bottom of the ocean. I don't know if you remember that scene. And they all come down and they're harvesting what is at the bottom of the ocean. And that just moved me so much because Jules Verne was asked by his father to travel only in his imagination, because he was going to, at 11 years old, I don't know if you knew this, he supposedly was going to go on a ship and be a mate. And his father caught him and said, travel only in your imagination. And I can imagine that for Michael, the call from his father, had he been able to say things like that, is travel only in cycle, Michael. Travel in psyche and harvest and bring back what is there from the unconscious in a way that we can assimilate, in a way that we can take in. And in order to do that, there are three things that are required. And one is a stout heart. 2, a steady hand. And 3, the unflinching gaze, to be able to look, to be able to have the steadiness to guide us and to bring us back from the depths. The heart to contain it and not to be afraid. And that is what I want to bring to you today for Dr. Michael Conforti. What you will hear is he will take us to depths and bring us back. So, dear friend and colleague, director, founder, you of stout heart, steady hand, and unflinching gaze, Dr. Michael Conforti.
Thank you. It's very beautiful, very beautiful, Sylvia, what you said. The Jules Verne piece, I never knew that story about his father. So, and it's apropos because some of you know my father just passed away at 104 years old 2 weeks ago. So it's a very important time in my life as well. As an almost 70-year-old man, just losing a father at this age, it's quite interesting and strange. Let me begin by saying a few things about the Washington, D.C. group, which you mentioned. April Barrett, who I believe is on today, she's been the force behind the Washington, D.C. Young Group for probably 30 years. Her love, devotion, financial support, everything. But it's her passion for this work that kept that group going. And, you know, I have the deepest regard and care and love for April, for all that she's done in welcoming the CC program and all the people that she's done in DC. So I encourage all of you to check out the DC Young Society. And they're doing, like many groups are doing stuff online right now. I'm going to be there in April talking about one of my favorite stories of all time, Marcellino, the boy who fed the crucifix. It's a wonderful, it's a Sicilian version of the fairy tale she's going to be talking about. It's a beautiful tale. And the movie was made, I think it was made in Mexico. The original movie was made in Spanish. So it's a great story. So join the group, think about it. Assisi, the foundation. I mean, look, This work began 32 years ago in Assisi, Italy. We made our pilgrimage there in 1989, really not knowing what this work was to be about. There was something about the confluence of matter and spirit. And Jen, that's the wonderful series you put together, which has a wonderful response already. And from the beginning, we're looking at the influence of psyche and transpersonal dynamics on life, the individual and the collective. As I circumambulated that theme, something that I landed on about 15 or more years ago was the work of Elie Wiesel, which is the theme for these next 4 weeks of seminars. A colleague of mine, a wonderful man named Aryeh Maidenbaum, many of you know him from the New York Center for Jungian Studies, former executive director of the Jung Foundation in New York. He said to me, Michael, there's something in your heart, there's some kind of Jewish part to you. I don't know why you love reading all this stuff. Supposedly this Italian guy, this Sicilian guy. And he said, I got to tell you, there was a Conforti rabbi that lived in Italy for years. So, maybe you're connected somewhere. Maybe that's why you resonate to this work. Who knows? But I began going to some of Elie Wiesel's lectures back in New York. Some of you know the 92nd Street Y in New York. That was his stomping grounds for many years. He went there twice a year to give lectures, take 4 weeks at a time, 4-week lectures, 4 weeks. And here was this little man, probably 5'4", 5'5", thin. And you could see with all the wrinkles and indentation in his face, you could read his history. You could read what this man had been through. And without any fanfare, he would get on stage with a big desk and would just begin reading and telling his story. And I remember being captivated. And I remember one time taking my son there. My son that doesn't have heroes in the outer world so much. He ran afterwards. He said, Daddy, can I meet him? Can you buy me the book? Can I get him to sign my book? He ran to meet him. And I have the picture, Sylvia, somewhere. It's precious. And somebody else on the call today from Portland, Oregon, Rufus and Lola. I have a picture of Rufus with Elie Wiesel. Now, this is not about hero gratification, hero admiration, whatever. It's about someone who's able to speak about the unimaginable in ways that I have never met in my 40-year career or in my lifetime. Now, I know there are a lot of people that write about trauma, that write about memory, that write about the story of the Holocaust. From Viktor Frankl, Primo Levi is a very powerful force. And there are many people that talk about trauma. I mean, from Van der Kolk's wonderful work to Ruth Lannis's wonderful work to Kalsha doing wonderful work. They're all making contributions. If you read the workshop description for this, I did probably 10 drafts of that because I really wanted to say to express what I wanted to get to. What I didn't say, when I said the line that many people cry when they read it, when they read the book, The Accident, I bawled like a baby when I read that. I had never read anything that captured the internal experience of a life of someone that had been through trauma. I mean, I'm not bringing you into my life. I'm not talking about my life, but I will tell you that I'm sure many people on this call has been through a lot. You wouldn't touch this subject of the accident as just an outsider. There are no outsiders in this material. And while I value all my colleagues and all the authors that write about this work, I have never met anyone that really walks you into that world. And here's the tough part, walks you into that world without hope, without a candle to illuminate the darkness that exists in the world of absolute horror. And I read a piece here that, part of my notes, it's a comment that Hillman writes, and he said, clinical depression is when you live with despair and no hope. Analytic depression, clinical depression, is when you live without hope and with despair. The reason I'm drawing from this book, and this could easily, Sylvia and Jennifer, this could easily be a 10-part series. I mean, in brief notes for today, I have over 8 pages of material. I'll probably get through 3 of it. It's replete with stories of the soul. He never talks about the soul. He doesn't do that. He's not talking about psychology in the book. He's not talking about trauma theory. He's not talking about what to do. We could do all these wonderful techniques and gestures to deal with trauma. He doesn't do it. This story, and it's a true story, by the way, the accident, and I'll tell you the backdrop in a minute. He's walking you through what happens to a man in 1956. I did my research. It's 1955, 1956 that he came to New York, and he wrote the book roughly 8 years later. It's the story of a man that had been through the Holocaust. He was in Auschwitz in the camps when he was 13 years old. And he saw things that we're not going to talk about details. I don't need to talk about details. You all know enough about it, or you can read it on your own. Some of the stories, some of the languaging is not really appropriate for this sort of setting, okay, to give details. He lived through the bowels. He went into the bowels of hell. When Jung talks about shadow, you know what? When Jung began his work, when he talked about the shadow emerging in the dark unconscious back in the 1930s, late 20s, 1930s, he was talking about the Holocaust. It was clear. He wasn't making veiled references. He knew he was getting to the Holocaust. And he said something in this dark unconscious is erupting with a force that the world for forevermore have to deal with. Plagued by, deal with, whatever. Well, Elie Wiesel, again, as I'm saying, with all the people I've read like many of you. I've read the theorists, the authors, the ones who offer commentaries. I've never met anyone that walks you through what it really is like to live with this. Now, look, years ago, I gave a lecture in New York on the Holocaust and clinical practice. And an old man came up to me. An old man, you could see in his eyes, he was a very tender man. He was not coming to make a comment, to criticize, whatever, which would have been fine. But he said, Dr. Conforti, I really appreciate your work. I've been following your work for years, but can I make one comment to you? Criticism. It's okay, he says. I said, of course, because I really sense you could trust him, right? He said, one of the comments you made in your lecture was that we will never understand what created the Holocaust. He said, may I ask you not to say that again? Because the minute we say we will never understand, we may try to stop, we may stop trying to understand. As we stop trying to understand, we open the doors for repetition. I said, I never thought about that. I'm going back 15, 20 years now. I said, I'm so sorry. It never dawned on me. And ever since then, I've never said anything like that. So there's nothing like the Holocaust. People that have traumas, they have their own traumas, of course. Many of us have struggled in different ways. I don't know if any of us know what it's like. In some countries, yeah, genocide still goes on in some countries. In some Latin American countries, we know many of our colleagues, they suffer through experiences that are near genocide. But again, when you hear somebody tell about their life, about what really happens to them without trying to articulate the theories behind it, the reasons behind it, and you begin to see, in this work in particular, how events from what seemed to be the past eclipses potential to live in the present. The past becomes the present because it's not just the past. So that's why this book. And again, people that live through trauma, they live a different world. Okay, it's a different way of being in the world. It's a different way of being in relationships. And this book, which I really wanted to talk about, I don't think I said this, Yusuf, I wanted to give these presentations for the past 15 years. I wasn't ready. I think I am now. Because it helps us. What I felt personally in reading it, and I've seen many people feel, is it gives voice to our inner experiences. It gives voice to those moments when you say, this may never change. It feels like it's not going to change. Or we can't say that. You got to have hope. Think of tomorrow. Think about what's good. Think about what's great in your life. You know what? At these moments, as you're going to hear in these stories, beginning today and throughout this series, sometimes it's only yesterdays. The yesterdays become todays, and the yesterdays become the intimation of the future when you live in that world. So all of our talks about all of our euphemistic things, oh, it's going to be better. Pray to God. There's a reason for this. Let's find some way to express it and whatever. He takes you into when Jung talks about the dark night of the soul, St. John's dark night of the soul, the Negredo, you know what? The reality is that they become empty concepts for many people. Okay, I'm sorry. They become empty concepts because they're overused. And they're often devoid of the power of what the original people really meant when he talked about, when St. John talked about the dark night of the soul. He wasn't talking about kind of just a bad night, too much tequila, or an argument with his spouse or whatever. At those moments, all you see is darkness. And you know what kept a lot of the Holocaust people alive? They said, we believe there's going to be a new morning. The sun's going to come up in the morning. That's what they hoped for. And many people that have lived through trauma, by what I mean by trauma, let me define my terms here. A trauma is something that potentially could obliterate the personality. Ongoing and sexual violence, ongoing physical violence in homes, early death experiences of a parent or of a child, a parent with a child. This is not about narcissistic wounding. This is a different world. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm setting the frame right now, okay? This is not about our wounds, mom and dad didn't come to my baseball game or to my dance recital. They didn't come to my spelling bees enough or whatever. I'm talking about things that are just about obliterating experiences. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to say as my preamble here is that, especially with today's opening presentation, probably for the next two talks, I'm not going to be bringing in resilience yet. So I ask your patience, okay? And I mean it. I ask your patience because I want to present this in a way that echoes what Wiesel wrote here. What Wiesel wrote echoes the experiences of people that live this. And at times you don't see hope. You're looking around, you're making phone calls, you're praying, you're on your knees, you're doing whatever for hope. And sometimes you don't know if there's going to be hope, if there's reason to hope. I'm exaggerating? No. Again, if people that have lived this from the inside, this is real. So again, I ask you, I don't want to say it's indulgence, but you're patient. I think is the best word. You're patient that we're not going to make a preemptive jump to hope and resilience and turning around. It does turn around. We wouldn't be here if we didn't know this stuff can turn around with the scars you carry. Okay. Now, to begin going into the material in Elie Wiesel's life, Elie Wiesel passed away probably 3 or 4 years ago. And as many people said, he was one of the greatest living examples of a spiritual life. He got the Nobel Prize for his work in liberation studies. He was interested in human freedom. He wrote probably 68 books. He wrote a few cantatas, and he never stopped creating. And I recommend if you just watch some of the videos he does on YouTube, whatever. And the one he did with Oprah when he went back to Auschwitz, it's strange because even with Oprah, it was, she's done some wonderful work too. But the depth of Wiesel comes out. And she knew not to ask some question. He even said at some point that I'd rather not talk about that question. I'd rather talk about my mother. I'd rather not talk about this. And my God, this guy's coming from such a background where he knows I can't discuss this because it's still too painful 40, 50 years later. Okay. When Wiesel was asked, what's the core issue you have for humanity? He said, well, look, I don't have this inflated view of myself. I don't think of myself as being for humanity, but I have a message. He said, I do have a message. Not to forget. Now, it's interesting. Sylvia and others know this. Jen was in a seminar where a colleague of mine from Italy, Flora Nava, she gave a lecture. And she did it on etymology. Okay. Eleni was Eleni Leviti, who's here, originally from Greece. And she talked about two important words, scordare, okay, and dimenticare. And she said the roots of the word are core. So the same with corazon. Right, corazon. The root of the word is core, C-O-R-E, which is old word for the heart. And she said, scordare, dimenticare, to forget, means to remove from one's heart. That's the etymological root of the meaning of to forget, to remove from your heart. We heard that. I remember it was we were all in tears watching it and listening to it. You can never think of, oh, I forgot your birthday. I forgot I forgot your father's name. I forgot whatever. It means on an archetypal level, you remove from your heart this issue. And scordare is more old Italian. Actually, another meaning of scordare is to be out of tune, like the guitar. La chitarra è scordata, okay? Scordata. It means it's out of tune. So we're out of tune when we remove things from our heart. Ricordare, to remember, means to return to your heart that which had been exiled, which is one a big part of Sylvia's work, okay? To remove from one's heart and then to bring it back. So Wiesel's life was about remembering. And I think the opening line I really want to begin with this presentation is to say that repetition is remembrance, okay? Repetition is remembrance. So much of life is driven by memory. In this book, if you really think about the book, The Accident, some of you read the version called Day. It's in the trialogue, right? Trialogue? Or trialogue, right? It's all about memory. It's all about memory where wherever he goes, memories takes over. So when he talks about memory and we begin to see the role of memory in life, look, if you really think about it, memory really often dictates and structures our future. How could it be? How many times do we get involved with marriage, with relationships, with colleagues, whatever? The relationships are predicated on prior relationships, on prior dynamics. Come on, it can't be true. Come on, it can't be true. Well, look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. And you see how much of what we do, the good too, the wonderful meals. My God, my best memories as a kid, 40 people around the table, eating and drinking, everybody screaming, they're great memories. You never forget it and you try to recreate it. The same with the bad memories. You don't want to recreate it, but guess what? They get recreated. So in some ways, we have to talk about memory as our entree into this material. Why? I mean, I know there's some trauma theories right now to say, well, we should never talk about the past. I say, really? You've got to be kidding me. How could you not talk about it when the past is always talking to us? Okay. The past never stops communicating. The past never stops seeking to structure the present. And what this book shows us, I'm going to read part of it today, is how you go into a situation, having lunch or whatever, and all of a sudden you're not having lunch with your friend. You're back 20, 30 years ago, back in the camps, back in the trauma, back in the violence. How could memory be such a powerful thing? And as clinicians, as theorists, whatever job you have, whatever different domains you live in, we take sort of a very simplistic approach to memory. Okay. We take a simplistic approach. Memory is just what we remember. But that's easy, right? It's what we remember. Learning is the acquisition of material. Memory is how we retrieve it and how we record it. It's the same with our life. But there's got to be even more. Why is memory such a powerful force? Why can memory come and take over that wonderful lunch you're having, that wonderful event by the fireplace, the wonderful story, whatever, and all of a sudden you're taken over by memory? So let's begin, okay? Let's begin there, because this is really one of the core issues in Elie Wiesel's life. Now, with this, let me add one other piece, which is why the Ravages? Well, why am I calling this the Ravages in the life of the forgotten? The Ravages because of this. How often do the events of the past come and take over our life to cause repetitions? This is why I say repetition is remembrance. And you find that so many good, wonderful people, wonderful, good-hearted people that in analysis, they try really hard and everything. What they do is you find yourself repeating and say, my God, here I am again. How could it be? Now, remember, there are two parts of this. On one hand, we don't forget, we repeat, okay? So number one, the events of our life, the events of our past come back to us every day through repetition, number one. The second part, where the ravages also come in, is we repeat our defenses against what we want to forget. I'll say both, okay? Because it's a very important piece. And number one is we don't forget, we repeat, okay? This is classic Freudian work. Number two, which a piece I'm adding here, is we also repeat our defenses against what we want to forget. Now, if you think of what nature does to help us forget, nature wants to help us. They want to help us persevere. They want to help us move forward. And what it does, it works by in the face of terrible trauma, let's say physical trauma, right? Some of you medical doctors, therapists, whatever, that know the medical world. In a medical trauma, in a physical trauma, the body cuts off. You may faint, pass out. On a psychological level, we dissociate. Dissociation is wonderful, right? In many ways. Now, I was telling a colleague recently that, dissociation is great. Nature's working, but you know what? The dissociation also creates re-victimization in the present for many of us. Because when in the face of the trauma, even when it begins to come up in a smaller way, some version of a repetition, some version of the violence coming back, whatever, we dissociate. And you know what? At that moment, we leave ourselves totally open to be re-victimized by these issues. And I had this strange fantasy, if we can imagine going into the biological structure and tinkering with the need to dissociate, like put a something that will modulate that response. I know that's what Efrat Janot, she's giving, I think, the opening talk in our Science and Psyche seminar. She does a lot on neuropsychology, neuropsychiatry. But if we could find a way to modify, because it's somewhat terrifying when you find we're back and back and back in it. Okay, the next piece. Wiesel is a Jew. Wiesel was a Hasidic Jew. He adored his religion. He struggled with his religion. And somehow, who knows how, he never lost faith. And I want to read you a few things that he says about memory, okay? He says, "You know well, you, source of all memory, that to forget is to abandon. To forget is to repudiate. So do not abandon me. God of my fathers, for I have never repudiated you." I'll read it again. "You know well, you source of all memory, that to forget is to abandon. To forget is to repudiate. So don't abandon. God of my fathers, for I have never repudiated you." Then he goes on. "God of truth, remember that without memory, truth becomes only the mask of truth. Remember that only memory leads us back to the source of our longing." In the last piece, he says, "For a Jew, nothing is more important than memory. He or she is bound to his origins by memory. It is memory that connects us to Abraham, to Moses, and to the great rabbis. If one denies memory, they will have denied their own honor." And he is asked, "So you insist on keeping all your wounds open? Those wounds exist. It is therefore forbidden and unhealthy to pretend that they don't exist." And this is our beginning going into Wiesel. And in many ways, this is not so much a homage to memory, but to understand the archetypal roots of memory. Why? Why do they come back, and why are we haunted by this stuff in so many ways? Again, the wonderful memories, the great dinners, whatever, as well as the traumatic ones. The story begins when Wiesel comes to New York, trying to make a life after experiences in the camps. Now, right there, it's almost an impossible situation. How do you even consider making a life after what you've been through? Because that is your life. How do you find any kind of hope in a world where all you've seen and what you've been scarred by are the unimaginables? And I want to share this story I wrote about in the description for this, that when I had the good fortune to meet Elie Wiesel a number of years ago, I had a one-on-one meeting. And I said to him, I think I wrote this in the description, that psychology and religion and so many of our attempts to help people that have been through the unimaginable have not helped. And he gave the response, which I'll never, ever forget because it was confusing at first. He said, the only response to unimaginable suffering is a moral response. Moral, M-R-A-A-L. I said, I don't understand what you mean by that. And he said, to just be with somebody without any of the gimmicks I mentioned in the beginning, any of the techniques, with any of the desires to help people to be different, to get over the stuff. Can you sit with somebody with this? And I tell you, look, I've been a clinician for 42 years now. And I know what it's like for me and many people I supervise, and much of what I've read. The minute this stuff comes up, the minute the emergence of severe trauma comes up in one's life, we're running for the hills. We want to do something. And the minute you want to do something, most often it's a defensive reaction on the part of the therapist. So he comes to New York, right? He comes to New York and he meets this woman, Kathleen. Kathleen says she loves him and he says, I like you. Good enough relationship. Now, who's Kathleen? Now, apparently there is a real Kathleen, and I heard the backdrop to the story. I'll tell you some other time. And Kathleen meets this interesting little man who's obviously carrying a lot of baggage with him, a lot of scars with him, and she just believes she falls in love with him. In many ways, the relationship between Kathleen and Elijah in the story is a story about many people that are married or have a relationship with somebody who's deeply traumatized. And this is one of the other reasons I wanted to give these talks. The illusionary nature of what Kathleen felt and believed about her partner, who she loved, was just that. It was illusionary. How many partners could look at the person they say they love and realize, my God, what scars they carry? And you may never, ever be able to enter that world with them. And some of you know what it's like being married to or being involved with someone who's a veteran of war, that's seen fire, that's seen battle, or been involved with somebody that has lived through terrible, terrible traumas in their own life, physical, sexual, whatever it might be. And we see one of the lines later in the book when she says, look, give up your horrors, give up your ghosts. You mean, because he would have these night terrors. He would fall out of bed sweating and screaming through the night. And she said, honey, come on, please, just give up your ghost and give up your terrors because I love you. And he looks at her like, who in God's name are you talking to? That you think that because you love me, I could give this up? Don't you understand? He even said at one point, the past never gives up the living and the ghosts never keep their promises. But she's got this illusion. And it's common because, look, it's not because it's malicious, because no one wants to see this stuff. Everybody wants the best for their partner. Who could live with it? Want to watch a great movie? Watch the movie Garden State. It's a great story about how you live with someone who has trauma. Garden State. It's a powerful film. But anyway, in so many ways, this is a story, a relationship, which speaks to the incredible illusions one has about the partner and the truth that one doesn't want to admit, which is, I may never know that place in you. I may never know what it's like for you when you saw, okay, we're not talking about the Holocaust now, for other people, for clients in our own life, what it's like when you saw the violence in your home, when you heard someone walking down a hallway, coming into your room at night, and there was nobody to protect you. I was at a lecture years ago with one of Erich Fromm's proteges, Erich Fromm, the great psychologist, and this man was giving a lecture, and he said, he tells his patients that have been through terrible trauma, you're no longer alone, I'm with you. I'm with you. Don't have to feel alone. I guess my Brooklyn blood came out. I said, how dare you? You son of a you put the rest of the right. Say, how dare you re-traumatize these people with your illusions? You're with them. No, the truth is nobody's with them. That part will always be alone and isolated. That part will suffer in part alone. Yeah, it's wonderful if you love them and you care, but if you don't know what they've been through, or if you don't know that they've been through things that you may never understand, you don't care about them. Kathleen was in love with her own illusions about this man. Wiesel never had the benefits of illusion. That's one of the things that, for me, makes his work so powerful. He never had the benefits of illusion that was stripped and stolen when he was 13 years old, living in the camps and watching the smoke arise from the incinerators and the crematoriums. There was no wondering what that stench in the air was. He knew it was. He knew what it was. Kathleen symbolized all the attitudes, therapists, clergy, spouses, wives, husbands, lovers, whatever, therapists that believe that my sacred container will make it better for you. My understanding. The only real response, when Wiesel said to me, he said, Marco, the only response is the moral one. Now I understand it. 15, 20 years later, I get it more each day. The moral response is to say, look, there's nothing I can do all I can do is be here with you and not try to evacuate my own terror. Psychoanalytic theory is replete with theories about defense mechanisms. And the one I want to get to right now that helps us get more into this material, one profound piece originated by Melanie Klein and really advanced by D.W. Winnicott. It's a theory of the manic defense. And for our purposes, there's only one thing to really discuss about it. He says, manic defense is a defense organized around the obliteration of the internal world. Manic defenses seek to destroy that which threatens our existence. We externalize, and in externalizing what we feel, we then obliterate interiority. Excuse me, how do you live with what this guy's been through? And I think it would be an offense to Wiesel and people that have suffered through the Holocaust to say they are like all of us that suffer. There is a difference. I'm not trying to do, who suffers more. That's a very dangerous game, and it's a cruel game. We all suffer in our own ways, people that have been through traumas. That was an obliteration of people. Holocaust was the attempt to destroy an entire race of people. Okay, that's what it feels like when we go through it, when the horrible things happen to us. But my point right now is, in many ways, Kathleen is symbolic of the archetypal tendency to obliterate reality. We create fictions. We create fiction where there is nonfiction. We create fantasy where there's reality. We create levity where there is heaviness. These are all major, major symptoms and behaviors that go with the manic defense. So Kathleen is major for us to understand in this story and for life in general about one who refuses to see the truth of one's life, the truth of somebody they say they love. Okay? Quiet desperation. Quiet desperation. Here he is. Come on. I don't think any of us can imagine what it's like coming to New York City, one of the great cities of one of a number of different great cities in the world, after been through what he's been through. And he writes here on page 10 in the book, the opening, to cover up another empty day. It was one of those quiet and monotonous Sundays that leave no mark on time. Washington, nothing. United Nations, nothing. New York, nothing. Even Hollywood said nothing. The movie star had deserted the news. On Times Square, people go there to feel less alone or more alone. That line, in many ways, is holographic in that it captures so much of what is in the hearts and soul of people that suffer. And I'm talking now coming to our lives more, not Wiesel and people that have been through a Holocaust. How often have you had the silent recognition, the beautiful birthday parties, the beautiful, what do you call the birth parties, the christening, all that stuff, And you say, look, all this joyous stuff, it's wonderful. Yes, it's part of life. But when you are in the domain of that trauma, all you see is obliteration. Another attempt to make yourself feel. Put the birthday caps on, blow the whistle, give the presents. Come on, give those all beautiful presents. Put the lights on the Christmas tree. Come on, Michael, this sounds dark. My point is, it is dark. This is the reality that he allows us to see, unblemished, untouched, unrefined. And I have never seen anybody in the world ever write this way, or tell the story, or live this way. Then we find, as he goes on in the beginning of the book, one day he's talking with Kathleen and he's outside the hotel. You may remember this on page 11 of the accident. He's outside the hotel and he sees these sailors looking at Kathleen, and Kathleen is very beautiful, gorgeous. And he said, the sailors don't look at you with their eyes, you know. They save their eyes to look at the sea. They look at you with their mouth, with desire, with hunger, with the hope of satiation. And she says to him, but how do you look at me? And he says, she liked to relate everything to us. We were always the center of her universe. For her, all the other mortals lived only to be used as comparisons. I'll read that line again because he's giving us the story of a partner that cannot see the truth. Okay, so Kathleen asked him, how do you look at me? And he writes, like sort of incredulous. She liked to relate everything to us. It's all about us. We were always the center of her universe. For her, other mortals lived only to be used as comparisons. And my mentor, Dr. Yoram Kaufman, many of you met him or know of his work. He said, Michael, I'm so tired of hearing all this referential stuff. How many people, when you talk to them, oh, I know that. I've had that meal. I've been there. I've done that. And we don't listen anymore. We've got to make it self-referential to find a way to relate to people. And in some ways, we work to steal the experience of the other. Yes, it's natural. It's a natural way we learn languages. That sounds like this word in Italian, this word in French, this word in Spanish. It's self-referential stuff is a way to learn. However, it's also a way to obliterate the other. Okay? And then he goes on here. This is so powerful. This is on page, I think it's also on page 11 or 12. And he writes, you can love God, but you can't look at him. And Kathleen says, well, whom do you look at when you love God? She asked after a moment of silence. And he says, you look at yourself. If man could contemplate the face of God, he would stop loving him. God needs love. God does not need to be reflected by others. She can't step away. And he knows that she's going to be unable to relate to him. The next piece, which is incredibly powerful, and this is on page 12. They go out to eat, a simple meal. They go to lunch, right? Nice cafe in New York City, 1965-ish or whatever, right? Now, I'm from New York. I know what it's like. You go around Times Square, go to a great place to eat, you sit down. And he writes, this is on page 11 and 12. There was a small restaurant nearby. We went in. All right, I told myself, I also have to learn to eat. And I also have to learn to love. You can learn anything. 10 or 12 people sitting on high red stools were eating silently at the counter. Kathleen now found herself in the crossfire of their stares. She was beautiful. Her face, especially her lips, showed the first signs of fear. She showed the first signs of fear that was waiting for a chance to turn into live suffering. I would have liked to tell her once more that I loved her, but I couldn't. The scene is loaded. Here he is, a survivor of Auschwitz, coming to a restaurant to eat. And listen to what he does with this. The next story he tells here on page 12. I cut off a piece and lifted it to my mouth. The smell of blood turned my stomach. I felt like throwing up, he writes. Once I had seen a man in Auschwitz eating with great appetite a slice of meat without bread. Starving, I watched him for a long time as if hypnotized. I followed the motions of his fingers and his jaws. I was hoping that if he saw me there in front of him, he would throw me a piece. He didn't look up. The next day, he was hanged by those who shared his barracks. When I saw his body swinging in the latrine, I wondered, what if he had seen me? Eat, Kathleen said, eat. Kathleen pretended not to notice how pale I was. Who knows, I thought, maybe she is learning how to lie. The sadness and bitterness of his voice filled me with pity. Kathleen had changed, I told myself. She who believed in defiance, in fighting, in hatred had now chosen to submit. She who refused to follow any call that didn't come from herself now recognized defeat. I knew that our suffering changes us, but I didn't know that it could also destroy others. Now you could say, this is just the emotion of somebody that's been through Auschwitz or the concentration camps. There's so much of what he's conveying in these stories. Again, listen to that last line again. I knew that our suffering changes us, but I didn't know that it could also destroy others. Do you realize what one carries when they've been through, whether the hell of Auschwitz or the hell that I'm sure some people on this call live with? Studies were done by Eric Kandel and others of how experiences of one person literally affect the synapses of another. They know it. You know it when you live in this world. And sometimes, you're going to hear later in the book, he writes, again later, I forget what page it's on, he says, people like us should be put on an island somewhere else. We shouldn't contaminate others. We're like lepers. We should live our own world away from the rest of the world so we don't affect others with our pain and our suffering. Now, again, you can say, that's not us. Come on, man. This is exaggeration. It's hyperbole. It's whatever. It's glorifying things. I could tell you that from a lot of experiences, when you cut away the defenses, appropriately, of course, appropriately, and when the timing is right, when the defenses begin to subside and some trust is there, and you hear what people live with that have been through, experienced terrible traumas, you often see this level of this feeling of, oh my God, what have I done to my kids? What have I done to a spouse? What have I done to my patients? I mean, we all know cases where analysts have had sex with patients. Imagine if they were ever to come to grips with what they really did to rip people apart by doing this. Robert Lang said that the great psychoanalyst Robert Lang said, the human psyche is not prepared to deal with the vicissitudes of such powerful emotions. And again, I'll be a broken record, I don't care. Wiesel's work gives us access to that world. So if you ever wonder, what really goes on underneath our stuff, underneath our struggles and our suffering, what does somebody really feel? This is in some ways a manifesto to give language for what people never want to admit. The other piece, like that scene in the restaurant, okay? To think about it, it's so loaded. Here you're sitting down to eat a meal after you've been starving for how long in the camps and watching people die of starvation. He watched his father die next to him of starvation and beating, and you're going to have a great meal. How do you enter the world? You tell me. How do you really begin to enter the world and have that wonderful filet mignon? You have that great bottle of wine, and the great maybe champagne or prosecco to open up the meal. When you had that, well, you seem to have a fear of enjoying yourself. I mean, these are great therapeutic lines. You have a fear of enjoying yourself. You have survivor guilt. And Wiesel was asked, "Do you have survivor guilt?" He said, "For what? What did I do? I never survived because of taking advantage of anyone else. I never stepped on anybody's live body to get ahead. I never did it. I have no survivor guilt." You see, his stuff is stripped of illusions. His stuff is stripped of all the fancy articulation we do. In some ways, to deal with this work, it's a coming home to a very, very profound, basic level of life. Stop the nonsense, stop the noise, stop the euphemism, stop trying to make it better. It's in the beginning, anyway. In the beginning, we collectively, whatever role we have, parents, partners, therapists, ministers, whatever role, okay? We do a terrible injustice to somebody when you try to make it better. When you try to tell someone it's going to be better tomorrow, the next day, you tell somebody, but it's only a bad day today. Excuse me. Who are you looking at? When Kathleen tells him, "Give up your ghost and because I love you," are you serious? It's a wonderful hope that I'm sure we all share, that we all hope to God that we can climb into the little cocoon of love and get away even temporarily from the demons that we live with, the demons from your addiction, the demons from your tendencies that get us into trouble time and time again. We all hope for the same thing. We all want to drink from that fountain. Come on. It's not love. And that's why this story with Kathleen is so profound. It's what we don't want to be. Kathleen is, yes, it's a partner in the world. Kathleen is also the estranged anima that won't listen to the truth. It's only later in the book we find that somebody does listen because they know the story. The women in Wiesel's life, I mean, he married a woman named Marion. And she also was involved in the camps. I don't think she ever tried to change her. I mean, how many people we do here in clinical practice when they say, "Well, if we marry the person, they're going to be different because of my love, because of my generosity." Whatever. Oh, get out of here, please. It's a hope. If you can't marry that person and be with them based on who they are today, it's over. But this is even more profound. Someone who suffered so deeply may never be able to bring you into that world. You got to accept that. We got to accept that. Like that therapist, Eric Fromm's student, that said, "You'll never be alone again." He told that woman that was his women patient that were experienced terrible sexual abuse in the dark of night, alone in a room. I said, "How dare you? How dare you re-victimize these people with your illusion? It's your hope." And you know what he did afterwards? He came up to me after the lecture. I was a young guy doing my doctoral studies. I guess, like I said, the Brooklyn blood still really came out of me. He came up to me and said, "You're right, Mike. I am sorry." I said, "Well, you should be." I said, "You should be sorry, but don't say it to me. Say it to the patient you beat up." And there was a terrible comment. It's not that we're malicious. We don't want to go there. Like I said, when Jung began to work on the concept of the shadow, when he began to talk about the eruption of the dark unconscious, Jung and von Franz and Barbara Hanna, they were brilliant. They knew this level. If you want to look at the so-called evolution in Jungian psychology and the concept of the shadow has been sanitized. I think it's the word you gave me, Sylvia. It's been sanitized and cauterized. You're not pleasant enough. You're not kind enough. Excuse me. Jung began by finding objective evil. And they say he was one of the few people that talked about objective evil that exists in the world and the psyche. If someone can do the work of what the Holocaust commandants and the Nazis did, that domain is possible to get to. It exists as a psychic reality, the torture, the trauma, the brutality. So does, for our work, the torture and brutality experienced by the victims. What this seminar is about, and I hope I do it well, I really do, to give voice to some of this, to give voice to the reality of what people have been through that lived through this. And it's a different voice than what we're accustomed to listening to. This is not initially the voice of resilience. This is not initially the voice of hope. And you wonder, how can you ever accompany somebody through any of this stuff? It begins with ourselves. And that's where Jung and others say, you got to do it yourself first. And we all run. Come on, I try to be as real as myself as I can. We all want to run from this reality. And I think what makes this man so special is that somehow, and it wasn't intentional, it wasn't an intentional process on his part, it wasn't conscious. He somehow went through this world and went through these experiences, living in two worlds simultaneously, trying to be in the contemporary world while the past and the field that was dominant for him continued to take over. And that's why I began with memory, because when we begin to see how the past eclipses the present, I think we need a different lens. Say, what is the archetypal nature of memory? And a reference I'll give you, I strongly recommend you watch his work. Read and watch the work of Eric Kandel, Kandel. He got the Nobel Prize for memory. A brilliant man, a teacher, psychiatrist, and researcher. And tell you something really interesting. As I do my research, it's interesting. I found this piece. And he said, I found myself interested in memory, but what I realized was, oh my God, I'm interested in memory because my family was through the Holocaust. This is Eric Kandel speaking now.
Oh.
You know, and in one last piece, he talks about a person that had lost their memory. Okay, and you here read the piece. Very powerful. Sorry about this noise back here. And a man who lost his memory, he says to the interviewer, can you imagine having one night last for 20 years? With no dreams, no difference between day and night. It's painless, but this is not desirable, is it? It's death. It's death to live in the absence of memory. And look, we understand why we want to obliterate memory and why the psyche prepares us by dissociative reaction, by the manic defenses that come out autonomously. However, while they help us in a lot of ways, they also keep us, this is one of the opening comments today, they also make us susceptible to its repetition because we dissociate when we are back in a situation that could be annihilating or terribly threatening. We're gone again. We're a deer in the headlights and watching that train come down the tracks at us. And that's why you realize in some ways the natural reaction of dissociation needs to be understood on a deeper level. We need to find ways to alter. Okay, look, this is our beginning today. And I'm working with material that I've struggled with for many, many years. And I hope it's coming out clear. It's not going to be a really polished, and this is not an attempt to be polished because there's nothing polished about this world here, okay? And it's going to feel somewhat raw. It is metabolized, just so you know that it's metabolized, a lot of it. But I hope some of the rawness comes through, and has to. You know, to do this work, I think you need to remain in touch with the raw experiences of our own pain. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll stop here on this note today.
Michael, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of the foundation, thank you for bringing to life and to voice stout heart, steady hand, unflinching gaze. And to all of us, may we also meet again next week, bring our stout hearts, our steady hands, and our own unflinching gaze.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, everybody, have a good night. Have a good night. Have some wine. Do some things that bring you to joy. Do it, do it, do it. I'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.